The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, defended European independence in Davos as US President promotes his expansionist foreign policy.
US President Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs on French wine and champagne if Paris does not join his proposed board of peace.
Activists say the number of deaths in a crackdown by authorities during Iran's ongoing nationwide anti-government protests now exceeds 4,000.
The President of the European Commission once again defended European independence. Ursula von der Leyen stepped onto the main stage of the World Economic Forum in Davos on Tuesday. She called on Europe to seize the moment as Donald Trump promotes his expansionist foreign policy, upending the transatlantic alliance along the way.
Geopolitical shocks can and must serve as an opportunity for Europe. And in my view, the seismic change we are going through today is an opportunity, in fact, a necessity, to build a new form of European independence.
Although this is not the first time von der Leyen has called for greater autonomy, her speech took on a new meaning against the backdrop of the extraordinary crisis pitting the two sides of the Atlantic against each other. United States President threatened to impose a 10% tariff on 8 European countries, all NATO members. Donald Trump is seeking to strong-arm the sale of Greenland, a Danish territory. The threat could upend 80 years of alliance and fuel serious fears of an irreversible fracture. Trump's tariffs will kick in next month unless the Europeans, who are betting on diplomacy to de-escalate, can convince him to change his mind.
Europe has very strong tools now, and we have to use them when we are not respected and when the rules of the game are not respected, by the way. The anti-coercion mechanism is a powerful instrument, and we should not hesitate to deploy it in today's tough environment. We must also advance the principle of European preference. There is a North American preference in your market. There is no European preference today. We are progressively creating it, and in the latest documents and decisions taken by the decisions, we do have the first examples of that, but this is extremely good.
US President Donald Trump has threatened to impose a 200% tariff on French wine and champagne. The decision comes after French President Emmanuel Macron said France did not plan on accepting the invite to join Trump's proposed board of peace for Gaza. The board was initially an idea proposed by Trump as part of his plan to end the war in Gaza, although it now seems aimed at mediating global conflicts. The US president has extended invitations to dozens of countries, including Russia and China. However, there are fears the board could undermine the United Nations framework.
I'll do is if they feel like Costco, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, and he'll join. But he doesn't have to join. If he said that, you're probably giving it to me a little bit differently. But if he actually did say that, but as you know, he's going to be out of office in a few months.
In a separate incident, Trump also published a private text message from Macron on his Truth Social platform. In it, the French president invited Trump to dinner in Paris on Thursday. He also said he'd invite the Ukrainians, the Danes, the Syrians and Russians. Macron also said he did not understand what the US president was, quote, doing on Greenland.
More than 2,000 demonstrators took to the streets on Monday in Zurich, the Swiss capital, to protest against US President Donald Trump and the World Economic Forum currently taking place in Davos. The protesters, belonging to environmental and left-wing groups, contested what they called a meeting of oligarchs. Among the slogans chanted was, "Trump is not welcome." One of the protesters set fire to a US flag and there was tensions with the police. The demonstrators threw firecrackers, smoke bombs and fireworks while the police responded with water cannons, tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the crowd. No injuries were reported. Protest also took place in Davos, venue of the World Economic Forum, following the Oxfam report on the increase in the wealth of billionaires worldwide.
Israeli bulldozers began demolitions at the headquarters of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, in occupied East Jerusalem on Tuesday. The organization denounced the move, calling it an unprecedented attack, slamming it as a violation of international law and the privileges and immunities of the United Nations. UNRWA spokesperson Jonathan Fowler said Israeli forces stormed into the compound shortly after 7 a.m. local time and ousted security guards before rolling in bulldozers. He warned that the move should not be taken lightly by non-governmental organizations or the international community, stressing that what happened to UNRWA can happen to any other NGO or diplomatic mission in the future. Far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir visited the site and celebrated what he called, quote, a very important day for governance in Jerusalem. He denounced UNRWA as an organization that harbors and supports terrorism, warning that other supporters of terror can expect the same fate. The incumbent Israeli government has repeatedly accused UNRWA of providing cover for Hamas members, but has never provided concrete evidence to back up those allegations.
The number of deaths in a crackdown by authorities during Iran's ongoing nationwide anti-government protests now exceeds 4,000, according to the US-based human rights activists news agency. They fear the number will grow far higher as information leaks out of the country, still gripped by the government's decision to shut down the internet. Iranian officials have not given a clear death toll, but Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei acknowledged for the first time on Saturday that the protests had left several thousand people dead, blaming the United States. The agency also reported over 26,000 people had been arrested. Comments from officials have led to fears of some of those detained being put to death. Tensions remain high between the United States and Iran over the crackdown after President Donald Trump drew two red lines: the killing of peaceful protesters and Tehran conducting mass executions in the wake of the demonstrations. Trump has repeatedly vowed to intervene should his administration assess that Iran has crossed those lines.
The Islamic State group has claimed an attack on a Chinese restaurant in Afghanistan's capital that killed at least 7 people. The militant group said a suicide bomber entered the restaurant and detonated an explosive vest.
دیروز اولی ساعت 3 بجه بود که داخل رستوران شنایاب بروبری دکان ما رستوران جو کردن. داخل رستوران یک انتحار انفجار شد. تقریبا ساعت دکان اولی 3 بود که انفجار شد. ما همین شاهد عینی بودیم که داخل دکان بودیم. انتحاری که شد مؤثر شوکی دکان خود به بیرون افتادیم. دیگه هرچی کشته و تلفات زخمی داشت.
IS said the attack was in response to China's alleged mistreatment of Uyghur Muslims in the western province of Xinjiang. The group threatened there would be further attacks against Chinese nationals in Afghanistan.
中方已向阿方提出紧急交涉，要求阿方全力救治伤员，进一步采取有效措施保护在阿中国公民、项目和机构安全，尽快查清真相，惩治凶手。
The restaurant was jointly owned by an Afghan man, a Chinese national, as well as his wife.
penguins are changing the time at which they're breeding at a record speed, faster than any other vertebrate. And this is important because the time at which you breed needs to coincide with the time with most resources in the environment. And this is mostly food for your chicks, so they have enough to grow, but it's also like terrain, soil for which to breed on, or the fact that there are less predators.
Like a penguin CCTV as well. So there may not be our eyes on the penguins all the time, but the cameras are there. Then we can go on field work to retrieve that data and begin to see what's going on. These cameras tell us things like when the first penguin adults turn up to breed, when the chicks hatch. They also tell us the temperature, where those cameras are positioned, which is really useful information to have.